Welcome to our session, Income Security for People with Disabilities, Part 2. My name is Steve Mantis, and I'm your moderator today. I'm a member of the DWC Steering Committee, and I represent the Ontario Network of Injured Workers Groups. Today's conference theme is Moving Forward Together. In this session, we want to focus on some of the current recommendations to reform income supports and how they relate to employment. We want to reflect on discussions throughout the conference, especially from the Income Security panel, which we held on the first day of the session. On day one in the Indigenous Land Acknowledgement, Stephen Litton, the board president of the British Columbia Aboriginal Network on Disability Society, BCANDS, shared that people with disabilities need stability and security to be ready for work, and that we need to look at the whole person. In session 1, Income Security for Persons with Disabilities, Part 1, on the first day of the conference, we heard about the value of an adequate and secure income, and how that helped people with disabilities and injured workers to focus more on employment and career development. We heard how many programs that provide income support for persons with disabilities and injured workers are pushing people off their programs, so they often turn to provincial social assistance. And we also heard about the high rates of unemployment and poverty among our population. We also had a primer on the proposed Canada Disability Benefit announced in the recent throne speech, which is based on the Guaranteed Income Supplement for seniors in Canada. Today, we have 3 experienced advocates to share their thoughts based on decades of research and experience on how to move forward together. Our first presenter is Laura Cattari. She's a senior policy analyst with the Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty Reduction. Ms. Cattari has participated in both Canada's 2017 review of the CRPD and the previous Ontario government's Income Security Reform Working Group and Disability Subcommittee that co-designed Income Security, the Roadmap for Change. Laura was also an Ontario Basic Income Pilot participant. Our second presenter is Michael J. Prince, who is the Landsdowne Professor of Social Policy at the University of Victoria. A longtime community activist and volunteer, Prince is currently a member of the Canadian Disability Advisory Committee to the Federal Minister of Disability and Inclusion, who we heard from on the first day of the conference. Neil Belanger has over 30 years of experience working within Canada's Indigenous and non-Indigenous disability and health sectors. For the past 10 years, Neil has been the Executive Director of the British Columbia Aboriginal Network on Disability Society, or BCANDS, an Indigenous disability organization holding special consultative status with the United Nations. BCANDS provides a variety of programs and services related to Indigenous disability across Canada. BCANDS' work has been highlighted through numerous provincial, national...
How we frame the disability supplement that's included. And I came up, and I have to admit, you are my first dry run. I'm in the position of writing a statement at the moment, a position statement on disability supplement. And I came up with a concept, I called it the 3 pillars. So the first pillar we talk about often when we talk about disability supplements: the medical costs. The medical costs of psychotherapy, the medical costs of fixing my wheelchair, the medical cost of drugs that are not covered by Ontario drug benefit. And of course, for those not on assistance, working part-time, low income, those drug costs are even higher. And so I thought, okay, well, that's really great. You know, it's providing a structural boost. When you compare basic needs between people with and without disabilities, those with disabilities end up structurally poorer because of the cost of disability. Perfect. The second one is social inclusion. And we talk about social inclusion all the time, but what is it? It's the ability to afford a companion when you're living in a group home, to go out into the community. It's the ability to afford the activity that you go out to do. It's the ability to have a hobby. So when you encounter people, you can talk about your hobby. And if we're looking at full integration in the community, that's the level we need to get to so that group homes don't feel like the institutions that we used to have. But the third, I think, is the biggest part of what basic income did for me personally. It takes into account decades of lower income, decades of not being able to work full time, and the costs associated long term, not just for today, but the fact that I need to replace my mattress and my sofa, which is broken. I need to make repairs to my home. I need new clothing and coats and boots. I need to be able to manage that long-term difference. And it's that invisible pillar that we don't talk about that I think basic income captured for me so perfectly. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. I really appreciated hearing your comments and lived experience. And my name is Michael Prince. As Steve introduced me, I teach at the University of Victoria here in British Columbia. And I want to acknowledge, first of all, I'm calling and speaking to you today from the Lekwungen speaking peoples, the Songhees and the Esquimalt First Nations. And I acknowledge with gratitude that I'm on their territories. I want to speak a bit about a couple of things. One is some of the announcements made by the Government of Canada over the last several months in response to the pandemic, particularly the income support initiatives. And then say a few remarks around the announced new Canada disability benefit, which again, the speakers on the first panel, particularly Sherry Torgman, took some time and gave a wonderful set of remarks about some of the choices and issues that face us going forward in what the design of a new Canada disability benefit could look like, some of the lessons learned from past programs that have been developed by the Government of Canada, and just things that we need to continue to have a dialogue about. And this conference has been a wonderful opportunity to bring people together virtually to have these conversations, and going forward in the coming weeks and months to have an input into the no doubt consultations and parliamentary hearings that will be held to consider what a new Canada disability benefit will look like. First of all, I just wanted to make the observation that there's been a number of major changes to major programs, particularly the employment insurance program, since March and April, when the pandemic first really became a serious threat to Canadians, and the Government of Canada realized that the existing EI, or employment insurance program, was not up to the task in two ways. One, its administrative delivery system was not nimble enough, responsive enough to react quickly to the obvious needs of millions of Canadians suddenly being put out of work or seeing massive reductions in the number of hours that they were working, and therefore their wages dropping quite significantly over the coming weeks. So the government decided to bring in the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, or CERB, which really was to do the job which EI wasn't able to do. Two things. One was to be quick, but secondly, to provide a broad coverage of Canadians who otherwise would not have qualified for EI under its existing rules. So in a way, the Government of Canada was acknowledging what many stakeholders and labor groups and workers have been saying for many, many years, which was that EI was no longer a comprehensive social insurance program that provided adequate benefits for Canadians who found themselves out of work for some temporary period of time. Now, since then, we've seen some more recent announcements in September around making the access to employment insurance easier to get, the number of hours necessary to qualify being lowered temporarily for 1 year to 120 hours. Also, we're seeing that the minimum basic payment for EI being guaranteed at a level of at least $500 per week, which is the amount that was delivered under the CERB benefit from the spring through to September. So in going forward, any discussions about future income reforms, we're really looking at a benchmark, I believe, of $500 a week, which has been acknowledged by the Government of Canada now in several programs during this year as a basic income, in effect. So for those looking at, therefore, when we turn to look at the new Canada Disability Benefit that was announced in September in the speech from the throne to open this new session of Parliament, it said it would be modeled after the Guaranteed Income Supplement for seniors. And as you may know, the Guaranteed Income Supplement, or GIS, as it's called, is an income-tested program targeted at low-income seniors. So for seniors who may qualify, and most Canadians do who are over 65, for most Canadians, seniors who receive the Old Age Security Benefit, the OAS, which is a near universal income benefit, about 40% of those recipients, because they live in such low income, receive the GIS, the Guaranteed Income Supplement. So it's there as an invaluable supplement or top up to the basic program provided to millions of seniors over the age of 65. So when we hear that this new disability benefit will be modeled after the GIS, what I think that really means is it will be modeled after a combination of the OAS GIS in terms of the kind of monthly payment that would be delivered. Now, the OAS GIS does not deliver at $500 a week. It's less than that. So one of the issues going forward is what the value or the amount will be that the Canada Disability Benefit will involve. So we will not only be talking about that benefit, but we also need to talk about one point that Sherry Torgman made, and I think I completely agree with her, is that this new disability benefit is proposed to be for working age Canadians with disabilities. So people between the ages of probably 18 to 64. So it raises the question of what about people with disabilities who are young, children and youth under the age of 18? And what about Canadians with disabilities 65 and over? Well, most people might get with disabilities over 65 may get, of course, the OAS and the GIS. They may also receive the disability tax credit. But even those would not be up to an equivalent of $2,000 a month or $500 a week. And so we need to talk about people in the non-working age populations as well going forward. But I want to talk just in the few minutes I have left about the Canadian Disability Benefit for those of working age. And although it will be largely an income support program, it has important implications for employment in a number of ways. One is that it will not, I believe, have a work test. You do not need to have a labor force attachment or a work history to be eligible for this program. Secondly, I think another employment dimension is that it needs to be an adequate amount of money that people receive every month. Adequate enough to get people out of deep poverty in this country, but also adequate enough to give people the dignity and the opportunity and security, the personal security, to believe that they can participate in society and possibly the economy in a way that is not possible when people struggle living in deep poverty. Third feature is, I hope this program has a generous earnings exemption policy, something far more generous than we see in most provinces under social assistance or income assistance. The programs that John Stapleton talked so well about in this first panel a few days ago. I'm suggesting we need something in the order of about $15,000 a year that people could earn while receiving this new benefit and not be in any fear of losing any of the benefit. So we need to signal to Canadians that there is an incentive to take work. We also need a gradual reduction rate. And what that means is that people suddenly don't lose dollar for dollar for the money they earn after reaching a certain level. It needs to be a gradual reduction rate so that we continue to reward work. All that together, to me, suggests that this new program needs to have a very positive culture around it of ideas, language, images that are conveyed in any sort of program descriptions that really signal to Canadians that employment will be supported if it's possible and available and appropriate for people given their life experiences. Lastly, beyond the benefit, we need additional investments in personal supports and everyday devices, and also in employment services. This benefit can't do those things, so this benefit will be very significant, and it will have some employment features to it, I hope, but to really make a serious dent in reducing the unemployment of Canadians with disabilities, we need to invest in those services. Thank you very much, and I will now turn it over to Neil Belanger.
Thank you, Michael. Hello, everyone. Before I begin, I'd just like to take the time as well to acknowledge the Squamish and Songhees nations whose traditional territories I am presenting on today, and also to acknowledge each of the territories that you are participating from. As Steve had mentioned, my name is Neil Belanger, and I'm the Executive Director of the Columbia Aboriginal Network on Disability Society, and we're a cross-disability Indigenous organization operating here in British Columbia and providing services across Canada. I also have the privilege to serve on Ministry Cultural Disability Advisory Group, along with Dr. Prince. And prior to that, we both served on the COVID-19 Disability Advisory Committee as well. So I want to thank Michael and Laura for their words, and in line with what Laura has outlined. I'm always amazed that when working in the disability community and working with persons with disabilities, there's always this mindset that almost less is more, and that people will have the ability to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and be able to really succeed. And certainly we've seen cases where people have done that, but we always have to ask ourselves, why are we not providing the adequate supports to make sure that people are successful, that they can be included in their community, that they can work and really thrive within Canada. We're not there yet. So I don't have a lot of information to bring here in relation to the new benefit, the employment strategy, and making applying for benefits more easy. That work is going to be coming down the road for all of us. It's important that persons with disabilities are given a voice in this process. They must be at the table. They must their insight and their direction, as well as service providers. I just want to talk a little bit about what we do here, and so why the new initiative, why the new benefits and focus on employment and ease of access to disability benefits important to us is because within Canada, 80% of the First Nations here have a medium income under the poverty line. Indigenous people also experience a higher rate of unemployment, higher rate of poverty. with transportation issues, housing, etc. So it's an exciting time to look forward that hopefully this new initiative announced in Harold's speech will make some positive change both for the Indigenous and non-Indigenous sector and members living with disability. So as you know, the plan has 3 elements: the disability benefit, the employment strategy, and the process to determine eligibility. So when we look at these things, and again, that's why it's important to have the disability community and persons living with disabilities involved in the process from the get-go. There's a number of questions that come up, and Dr. Prince has noted some of them. What is that benefit going to mean? What is it going to look like? I think it's going to be a top-up onto provincial and territorial benefits. What does that look like? What would that top-up equate to? What is that minimum? And those things have to be worked out. As we've heard, CERB was 2,000. That would be a minimum. That would be the minimum level in my opinion. I think it should be higher, just because of the increased costs that persons with disabilities experience, as Laura has already. And what's the criteria? So we have different levels of determining disability benefits across Canada. What happens in BC is not the same that happens in Alberta. What about portability? If you are approved federally and you live in BC and then you move to Alberta, but you're not approved for their provincial system, are you still approved federally? They're going to be a prescribed class application. So we have that in BC. So if you are, if you're a recipient of CPPD, you're automatically approved for provincial benefits or disability benefits as long as you meet the assets test. So you don't have to re-verify, re-go through your disability yet another time. Are we going to incorporate something like that? As Michael had said, earning exemptions, they have to be part of it, right? The emphasis shouldn't be that you have to work, but there should be a mechanism in there that you can work. What is that level? $15,000, $20,000? How does that impact on your eligibility to even apply? We look at provincial rates. We add on the exemption rate to say that's your threshold, because that's not how it works now. How will it affect, like Sherry had said, how will it affect other RDFP programs? How will it work with First Nations and their treaties? How will it work with First Nations that have the 10-year funding agreements? What kind of commitment are we going to get from provincial and territorial governments not to claw back new benefits, not to reduce their provincial and territorial benefits, not to reduce their health supplements? Those are all things that need to be worked out and hopefully can be worked out, and the federal government can use some of its close under the social transfer dollars. So there's a lot of questions, a lot of ideas that have to come in and suggestions that have to move forward before this even gets started, because I don't even think right now the government has a concrete plan of what they're doing. We'll have to make sure that we're available to advise. The employment strategy, I think that's great. I think that most people now realize that employment isn't just a matter of going out and saying, I want to get a job. You have to look at all aspects in a holistic way of a person's life and what's impacting their ability to get employment. So whether it comes to housing, it comes to poverty, it comes to transportation, it comes to their relationships. All those things impact a person's ability to obtain and maintain employment. So I'm hoping that under this employment strategy, they'll consider looking at, employment navigators to make sure that the social determinants of health are identified and assisted in, so that somebody, doesn't have to worry about getting a job when they don't know if they're going to be able to feed their kids, or getting a job if they're in a unhealthy relationship, or getting a job if they don't know where they're going to sleep. These are all things that are very real. Work has to be done with employers to dispel stereotypes both around Indigenous people and persons with disabilities. All those things. There's a number of things that need to be incorporated to be successful. And then finally, eligibility to access different programs. We know that that's often a barrier. The very programs that are in theory designed to assist are more of a barrier to access than necessary. For example, the costs associated with DWC can range from $50 to $250. $5 when you're living in poverty. That's a lot of money. So those things have to take a look at. When we look at the the CPPD, for example, as well, you know, in the maximum earning benefits that you can have, you know, listed in benefit. And we want to take a look at that too. And you know, people shouldn't be afraid to earn more, and they have to. I think it's $5,500 a year now. People should worry about getting to that end mark and then worry about a call from the government saying, hey, look, you have to work again. People don't have to deal with that. They should look at applying that kind of exemption, earning exemption to a higher level. And the only calls that should come from government and say, hey, you know what, you can earn more, and you know, we want you to earn more. So there's a lot of questions that have to be answered as we go forward. It's not a cut and dry thing. It's going to take some time. Positive thing as we go forward. And I think as everybody recognized, we haven't seen something like this in a long time. And so we need to look forward to that, work together to make this happen. And then, as Michael alluded, look at other deficiencies, because there's many, and start to